Hey guys, here we are, the Quiggin Out MMA Podcast, episode 70, and I went a little different this time. And I know you guys are thinking, who's this guy? Who's that magnificent beard that's on the other end of that screen? You may know him from the events that happened, I believe it was now 12 years ago. The man that was dubbed the Subway Hero himself, Joe Lozito. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Are people still calling you the Subway Hero? I just want to know. It's just right off the bat.
I think it's pretty much just that no one really calls me that. My dad, every time I speak to him on the phone, will tell me that I'm his hero, and maybe my mom too. But that's probably about it. Every now and then I may get someone say, "Are you the guy from the Subway?" But nobody calls me that.
Yeah. Well, and I don't mean to make light of the situation. And anybody who doesn't know, instead of giving you a backstory on Joe, I'm really just going to let Joe kind of command this one, and talk about that fateful day that was almost 12 years to the day. I know it was just the anniversary was not too long ago.
Yeah.
I kind of just want you to talk me through that day and kind of explain to people like how you got that nickname, why people gave you that nickname. But realistically, I want you to talk about that mindset going through. So can you kind of just walk us through, the beginning of that day to that moment that, everything changed for you forever?
Sure. So at the time I was living in Philadelphia. I'm back on Long Island right now, but I was living in Philadelphia and I was working at Lincoln Center, which is in New York City. And so it was a 2.5 hour commute one way from Philadelphia to New York. And what I would do is drive from Philadelphia to New Jersey, jump on New Jersey Transit. That would take me to Penn Station, and then jump on the subway, and that would bring me right to my job. And this particular day started out like any other day, and I got up and I did my morning routine and got in the car, drove to Jersey, and jumped on the Long Island, New Jersey Transit. Well, yeah, well now it's the Long Island Railroad. So I get to Penn Station, and there's a couple of subway lines. So for people not familiar with, I know not everybody has public transportation, but in New York City, we have subways, we have railroads, we have L trains. So subway, the stop that I get on is under Madison Square Garden, so people have a point of reference. And under Madison Square Garden, there are subway lines that run local, which means they make all stops, and there are express, which skip stops. They go to the main stops. I take a local train, but this day, the day, I guess it was the whole weekend, the local trains were not running at all. So every train was making express stops. So the reason why I say this is because there are a couple of things that day that normally don't happen. So the platform that I was on was going to make express stops anyway. Now on the other side of the station, there's another platform with 2 express trains. So since the local train was making express stops, all 3 trains were going express. But only 1 train stopped on my platform and 2 trains stopped on the other one. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, if I go to the other platform, I won't have to wait as long for a train. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. So I went to the other platform where the 2 and the 3 trains stop. I hadn't done it before that. And of course, I haven't done it since then. That was just a one-time thing. I go to that platform. I get on the subway. It's an Uptown 3 train. I get on the train, and maybe 10 seconds after me, 2 police officers get on, and they go right in with the engineer. And I'm right at the front of the train, right behind the engineer. So basically the only thing separating me from the person driving the train is the wall, and the police are in with the engineer. And normally doors open 10 seconds, 15 seconds, they close, we go. They stayed open a little longer, then they closed, and we didn't really accelerate very fast. And I was, it was a Saturday morning in New York. I figured, I don't know, maybe something's up, but probably not. It's probably just a Saturday morning in New York. And we're crawling. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, this guy comes up to the door to get into the engineer's booth. And he says, "Let me in." And people on the other side of the door say, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm the police." Now, what he doesn't realize is he's talking to the police on the other side of the door. He just thinks he's talking to the engineer. Mm-hmm. And so the police on the other side of the door say, "You're not the police." And with that, this guy walks back, sits down. Now, right after that, there was a guy standing next to me, and he bolts right up to the door. Except this guy, it looks like he's going to shit his pants. He's tapping on the door, waving the police to come out, tapping on the door, waving the police to come out, all while looking over his shoulder at the first guy that came up there. So now I'm going, all right, something's up. This isn't right. I don't know what's going on. So the first guy starts to make his way back up to the door. With that, the guy that's up there, he hightails it back right next to me. And the first guy, I keep calling him first guy, second guy, but the first guy comes up. He stops about 2 feet from me, about 3 feet from the door, looks down at me. I look up at him. He reaches into the back of his jacket, whips out an 8-inch knife and says, "You're going to die. You're going to die." And whap, stabs me right here under this eye. So now I'm like, okay. And I don't really have a lot of time to think. So it's not like I have time to formulate a game plan. So I guess it was just instinct. And the MMA part of this comes in is I went for a single leg takedown. Now, understand that I still don't have any training at all. It was just from years of watching MMA. So I'm thinking, again, and this is it's simple. You go after a guy's legs, you get him down, right? Except that since I had no training, it was the worst single leg takedown ever in the history of the world. And I shot in too high, and I ended up wrapping my arms around his waist. It was more like a football tackle. Mm-hmm. So the good news was I was able to take him down. The bad news was he had free reign on my head, and he stabbed me 3 times, like huge gashes in my head. So I get him down. I have dominant position, but he still has the knife. And while he's on his back, he's like slashing up at me. And he slashed up at me twice. The first time he sliced the webbing here on my thumb. Second time he slashed me in the tricep. Finally, the third time when he raised his arm up, I was able to catch it. I slammed his arm down, and the knife came out. And it was at that point where the police finally came out of the engineer's booth and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You can get up now. We got him." And
you just got stabbed.
Well, I got
times,
7 times. They watched the whole thing go down, and they didn't come out. And so let me fast forward a little bit. So now someone had pulled the emergency brake. So we're sitting in the tunnel between 34th Street and 42nd Street. Again, for people, frame of reference, don't necessarily know New York City. 34th is under Madison Square Garden, and 42nd Street is normally the epicenter of the world. People know it as Times Square, things like that. So we're in the tunnel, but we're stopped. And now all of a sudden they're trying to handcuff this guy. He's squirming around, and I'm sitting on the subway seat now. And now I realize how badly I'm bleeding, and I have blood coming out. The 2 biggest cuts were in the back of my head, and I basically have blood pouring out like this. And what I always tell people is, if you stand in your shower and have the water hit you behind the neck and you watch the water pour down, that's basically what the blood was doing to me that day. I sat there upwards of 20, 25 minutes bleeding out, hoping, praying that they were going to get the train moving. I found out they didn't get the train moving because they had to wait for all the police officers that were on the tracks. And to me, it just seems like once you got a guy in custody, just yell on the radio, "We got him," whatever, and get off the tracks. There was really no urgency to get me off the train, get me to the hospital. So anyway, we end up getting to 42nd Street. They had cleared the station. The only people that were there were the paramedics. Now, I was also lied to on the train. I was begging for any sort of assistance. The police on the train told me that the paramedics would be coming from the back of the train. And I kept looking. Next thing I know, we're moving. And I'm like, wait a second, what about the paramedics? And they were like, well, they're going to meet us at 42nd Street. So it was a lot of bullshit, being told to me that day. We finally get to 42nd Street. They take the first guy off, and the paramedics come in. They lift me off the subway seat. They're going to put me on the stretcher. And at that point, I pass out. But it's kind of like passing out while you're watching TV. So even though your eyes are closed, you could still hear what's going on. So I still hear what's going on. But then all of a sudden, and it was maybe for 5 seconds, I snap out of it. And that was the first time I felt any pain. I guess that was the adrenaline dump. because now my head feels like it's on fire. The whole time everything was happening, I felt the blood kind of spurting out of my head. I felt the knife, I felt the pressure, but no, I didn't feel the cut, I guess because of all the adrenaline. This is when I first felt the pain. And I mean, it was a pain like I've never felt before, and I hope I never feel again. I snap out of it. They get me upstairs. Paramedics were unreal. They were so great. They got me in the ambulance. Thankfully, it was a Saturday morning, not too much traffic in New York. They get me into the hospital. They wheel me into this room, and it feels like there's 15, 20 people, and they're cutting my clothes off, asking me questions, all this other stuff. And a police officer comes to the head of the bed, and he shows me a mugshot. And he says, "Is this the guy that did this to you?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Well, you're a hero." And I said, "Well, I'm not a hero. Why am I a hero?" He goes, "Well, he killed 4 people last night." So that was the first time that I was made aware that this wasn't some rando that was just going around hurting people. I found out later the gentleman's name was Maxim Gelman. He was on a 28-hour killing spree. He killed his stepfather. He killed a girl that he was infatuated with. He killed her mother. And he ran over a guy that just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So what I realized after that, putting 2 and 2 together, the guy that went up to the door second obviously knew who Maxim Gelman was. Everybody, I think, on the train that day knew who he was, except for me, because it wasn't in my news cycle yet, because, again, I was coming from Philadelphia. Yeah. So I think everybody knew who it was, including the police, because basically by that point, they were alerted that Maxim Gelman was in the subway system. So they basically they just flooded the subways with police officers. And these 2 officers on the train with me had the opportunity to make a career-defining arrest, and instead chose not to and hid for their own safety. But I'm blessed. I'm still here. I didn't die, although I lost a ton of blood. And like 7 wounds later, here I am.
And that's so crazy, because I know somebody's going to watch it and be like, "Oh, don't talk about the police." Listen, there are good people in the world. There are bad people. There are good cops. There are bad cops. There's good and evil. Like, I don't want to say good and evil, but realistically, that man that day was evil.
Well, let me kill that narrative for you right now. My sister is a retired New York City cop. I have cops in my family on both sides, my side and my wife's side. I am not anti-cop at all. Unlike a lot of people in the world now, I can separate a bad apple or 2 from the bunch. So just because I had the 2 single worst cops in the history of the world on the train with me that day, I don't broad brush police in general, law enforcement in general, or the NYPD in general. Absolutely not. I just had the unlucky opportunity to be on there with the 2 shittiest cops ever. So yeah, people should know that if anything, I'm pro law enforcement. If you wanted to put me on a side, because I had a family member that for 20 years went to work every day, not knowing if she was coming home or not. So I'll squash that. He's anti-cop narrative right now.
Yeah. And I love that you did that, because that wasn't like, "Hey, you should probably say this like right now before people get pissed off." But realistically, that's how this should be. There was a situation that was life-changing for you, because, I mean, like you said, you're sitting there pouring blood, and they're like, "Let me just we'll meet at the next." Like, no, get him some help. And we talked about it, and I don't think I've ever brought him up on the show, but my best friend of 20, I've lost count. We're at 21. I think our friendship's old enough to have a drink. That's what we figured out. He's the kind of person who's got a tourniquet around his leg. He's always prepared, and he's always making sure. So I feel like in that moment, had he been on the train, he would have just ran over. No formal medical training, but he would have been like, "Somebody do something." And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's good.
I'll bring up Alfred Douglas now. Alfred Douglas, people call me the subway hero and all this other stuff, and I'm always grateful for the kind words. There was a gentleman on the train that day who was a construction worker, has no medical training, no first aid training, and his name's Alfred Douglas. And Alfred Douglas was the one person who came over, and he applied pressure to my deepest wound, basically with his bare hand, because someone had given him some napkins, but they were basically saturated within 3 seconds. And Alfred Douglas, he doesn't know me. He doesn't know my history. He doesn't know if there's anything in my blood that's going to get him sick. And he selflessly came and applied pressure to the biggest wound on the back of my head. So that's my hero, is Alfred Douglas.
And for you to say that, like you said, in that moment, you didn't just say, "Hey, look, there's the guy that's been terrorizing everybody. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be famous." Like, that wasn't what it was.
No.
That man inserted you into that narrative. There was no way around that. What were you gonna do? Sit there and do nothing?
If I sit there and do nothing, then we're not speaking today. Because if I sit there and do nothing, see, that's the thing. If I retaliate, I have the opportunity to live. If I don't retaliate, then I'm dead. And my wife's a widow, and my kids are, without a father. And that's the part that I would never be able to get past. So, I say it all the time, and maybe people think it sounds hokey, but those 3 people, my wife and my 2 boys, were the reason why I fought that day.
Yeah. And, like we said, we're coming up. It's been 12 years. That doesn't mean, it's any less prevalent or it's any less there. Cause I guarantee around this time of the year, it kind of hits you. Like, if you, any travel, like anything has got to, like you said, it's not PTSD, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking like, wow, like if I hadn't done what I did, like we wouldn't be here today.
Well, I'll do you one better. It happens 5 days a week because I still work in the city and I still take the subway every day. Well, let's say 10 days a week because I take it to and from work. So, it's nothing I dwell on. And there have been things that have happened in the city recently and during the last 10 years, 12 years that when they happen, I get texts and messages from people saying, "Hey, how are you doing? I saw this thing happen in the subway. How are you holding up?" And, for the most part, I handle it okay. But, I'm not going to lie. Actually, it was maybe 2 weeks ago or last week, I think it was. And it just came out of nowhere. Like, it just hit me like, just thinking about what went down and how it could have really gone sideways in a hurry. And, it doesn't hit me often like that, but it did. And I had to take a moment almost to not compose myself, but maybe catch my breath a bit because, I've told this story a million times. I told you before we started recording that it's like I'm telling someone about a movie, but every now and then I kind of think about it. And I just realized that, if I had done anything differently, instead of him stabbing me in the head, he might have severed my spinal cord. And then if I'm paralyzed, I'm done,
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate. I'm very lucky. And, I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talk about, you brought up, the MMA, we're going to say background because everybody who watches, we all know there's that one guy who's like, I could be him. I can do this. But I think in that moment, if you really think about it, I think you're what you call a failed single leg, kind of a sloppy, more like is probably what stopped him from getting to other spots to stab. So it's really like, it's a crazy turn of events. And I don't mean to smile or like, I'm not laughing about any of it, but it's fucking crazy, man. Like,
well, and I'll tell you what, I will say this. I always say this whenever it comes up. I want to thank my friend Dean because my friend Dean, and we've been friends way long enough for our friendship to have a drink. It's been quite a few years. He was the one that called me the day before UFC 1. And he basically said, "Have you heard about this tournament?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." And he's like, "Oh, it's going to be all the disciplines against each other and that." And I was like, "Wow, I'm intrigued." And then the next night I was one of those people ordering it on pay-per-view. And I was like everyone else that had never heard of the Gracies because I'm like, they're going to murder this guy. Yeah. And I just sat there in awe. And I fell in love with it then. And, I'd watch it since then. And I always say like the whole idea maybe to go for his legs or a single leg had to be through osmosis because must have just been from watching all those events. And honestly, when it happened and I had told the reporter, single leg takedown, and obviously they don't know much about it. They would call it a leg sweep, and then it just became leg sweep, and I would say no, it was this. And I honestly have to say, as far as MMA goes, I am so grateful to the MMA community. Really wrapped its arms around me. Dana White, Keith Jardine, those guys, the fighters, UFC organization, Reed Harris was so amazing to me. And I always say what New York didn't do for me, MMA did. The MMA community was unbelievable to me. And then there's really no way to make anyone understand how important that was in my recovery.
Yeah, and like it's just blown away. Like that statement that you just said right there, what New York didn't do for me, the MMA community, because this community really comes together. And I'll start by saying it's really funny you brought up UFC 1, because the last person I had on my show is one of Hoist Gracie's first 5 black belts.
Oh, yeah?
And we talk about Hoist, and I got to meet Hoist a few years ago, about 4 years ago at a seminar. And that man is one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life. And you wouldn't expect it. Like, you just don't. And, we forget that they're people. And for the MMA community, while they've done some questionable things lately, and I won't pick on it. I'll just let everybody figure it out themselves. When the other John Jones, if you heard about him, it's
the guy on Twitter.
Yeah. That to me, like a guy who had never watched MMA was like, why are all these people and the threats? And he started playing into it, and he started having fun. And then you saw the MMA community just surround them. And you'll see it on the post, and he'll go, well, I know John's fighting because he's like, I had to put my phone on do not disturb because I got 870 tweets that said, you suck, quit doing cocaine.
Yeah. That guy's awesome. I love him. That guy's great.
He is. He was the first one of the first guest on the show because I thought
it was
really funny. And what I found out is when I told people that John Jones would be on my show, they did not expect him. And a lot of people shut it off after a minute.
They must not have Twitter. So.
No. And it was funny because I remember the day he followed me and I went, John Jones is following. And I looked and I was like, well, I mean, this guy looks cool. So sure, why not? Like, I don't care. But you talk about the community that we have, and it's still, there's no community like MMA. You can say, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, and we can talk about hockey because right now it's not looking good. It's 2-1 Maple Leafs, so we're not happy right now.
Well, it's not over yet.
Yeah, it's not over yet.
Yeah.
And but realistically, the MMA community just does something different, and they saw an opportunity, and not an opportunity to make headlines, not an opportunity to oh, look at us. They just went and did something nice for somebody who just went through a horrific experience and used the term single leg takedown. Like, yeah.
So basically, it started out, leg sweep, single leg takedown. And, and I say it must be osmosis because I've been watching UFC since the beginning. And then it just kind of blew up from there. And, just to the point where it happened on a Saturday, and Monday afternoon, I'm basically getting a text from Channel 5 here, the Fox station here in New York. Dana White wants to meet you. And I'm just like, what is happening here?
Like what?
Yeah, I'm like, what? You're kidding me. And basically what I was told was that they were basically UFC was having a meeting and all their phones were kind of blowing up because this was a pretty big story at the time. And then there's this guy saying that, we stopped this guy in the subway, he watches UFC. And basically Dana was like, I got to meet this guy. And so when I got back to the network, I said, well, yeah, but he's in Vegas, right? He goes, no, he's actually in New York. He's there. He wants to meet you tonight. And I was like, holy shit, So, I mean, it was unbelievable. They sent a car for me, and my wife, we went and met him at the hotel they were staying at. And listen, I'm going to say this right now. I know he's a lightning rod for a lot of people, and I know a lot of people don't like him, but I will say this. I don't necessarily agree with everything he does business-wise, although who am I to criticize? I don't have my own business. I certainly don't have my own empire. But as far as what Dana White and the organization did for me, I will support him no matter what. I mean, and I just want to say, like, one of the coolest things was meeting him, and basically him inviting us to sit cage side for UFC 128, and that was when John Jones beat Shogun.
Yeah.
And,
Oh my! For the
yeah,
title too.
yeah, and I mean that was unreal. And just like my wife and I are sitting there, and we're sitting next to him, and the funny part about that was we were sitting there, and it was in between fights, and he just comes to me. He's like, "How you doing? How's everything going?" And I said, "Oh, it's great." I'm like, last time we were here was when George St. Pierre fought Dan Hardy. Was the last event in New Jersey.
Yeah, UFC 111.
Before that one. And I said, and I pointed to him, and I said, my wife and I were 3 rows from the top, right? I said, it got to the point where we were just watching it on the scoreboard. And he just put his arm around me, and he goes, "Those days are over." And I was like, wow, like just unbelievable. And, so like to me, what the UFC did for me and my family, I mean, even, and my kids at the time were 10 and 7, and they loved the UFC. They loved Chuck Liddell, was their favorite guy. They both had mohawks. Like, it was just unreal. And I'll never forget. There was an email was sent to me by Dana's assistant, and she basically said, "I need all your sizes, like clothing sizes and favorite fighters and whatever." Okay, no problem. So I send the email. I went to a doctor's appointment here, follow up. He was going to, my local doctor, so I didn't have to go back to the city to get the staples taken out, because I had all my wounds had stitches, and 3 of them, the 3 big ones on my head, had staples. So he was going to take the staples out. And so I go there, we leave, we come home, and we're pulling into the driveway, and we're like, oh, there's some boxes. And then we pull in more because it's nighttime, and now the headlights shine on. And there's literally 11 or 12 boxes, and I mean big boxes of merchandise. And we get out, and it's like, I'm like, who is this from? And it's Zuffa. And I'm like, holy shit, my kids went bananas. I mean, absolutely went bananas. And we bring them all inside, and I basically said at the time, it's like we had a shopping spree at the UFC shop and didn't have to do anything. They just sent us like one of everything. And it was unbelievable. And like, like you say, people would go, well, the UFC never did anything in the press about me, because they weren't looking for it. They didn't say, hey, we sent this guy 11 or 12 boxes of merchandise. They never said, hey, he's going to sit cage side. They didn't bring me in the cage. They didn't do anything to say that they are building a relationship with me. They never did. Dana never did. The UFC never did. The person that I'm closest to in the UFC is Reed Harris. He's an unbelievable human being, and his wife. They're still friends to this day, and they're just unbelievable people. Reed and Laura are just incredible. And for me, it was a big deal when they said, "Oh, Reed Harris," and I'm like, "Oh my God, WEC, Reed Harris! I love that. I love the WEC."
Yes.
So I'm like, this is unbelievable. And just as human beings, I don't know if there's 2 nicer human beings on the planet. So, but again, it wasn't just the UFC. It was Frank Shamrock sends my kids a limited edition Xbox with MMA fighters on it. Shane Carwin is sending me stuff. I get a phone call from Keith Jardine, thanks to Mike Chiappetta. Mike Chiappetta did an interview with me, and he's asking me who my favorite fighters are. And I basically said my favorite would be Keith Jardine. Well, Joey Villasenor reads the article. He tells Keith. Keith calls Mike Chiappetta to get my number. And next thing I know, he was out of the UFC already. He calls me, and he invites me and my wife out to Albuquerque to watch one of his fights. This was a fight he had prior to getting in Strikeforce. So it was in between UFC and Strikeforce. And, the promoter, and we're going to put you up in the hotel, and you're going to come and sit, VIP seats and everything. And there was I guess a couple of fights finished quicker than they thought. I end up in the cage with Rashad Evans. I'm just like, this is unbelievable. Like I'm there with the whole, like I'm Jackson Winklejohn has their own little stage there because it's Albuquerque, and my wife and I are sitting there with those guys, and I'm just like, this is unbelievable. So it really was just an unbelievable experience that the MMA community really. I say this, I don't know how my healing would have progressed without those people, because it really, you know what the most important thing it did? It really took my mind off things. It
Yeah.
really was a big distraction, and it took my mind off things, and it allowed me to mentally, psychologically heal in a way. Physically you're going to heal at your own pace, but all of these things were just unbelievable distractions. And it wasn't just for me. Anything that we were invited to, it was the four of us. It was my wife. It was my sons. And it was just, it will always mean the world to me that the UFC and the MMA community in general really stepped up big time for me when they didn't have to, and for no gain for themselves. It was strictly selfless. So
No. And that's what a lot of the good MMA community is about. And I say good because we talked about that line. There's good and there's bad. But realistically, like, I remember, I think I barely had a Twitter around the time that everything happened with you. And I remember seeing the story and being like, I got to talk to this guy. And I think I messaged you then.
yeah.
And we're talking 10 plus years ago at this point. And I just
Mhm.
remember being like, we would chat every now and then, but nothing much. But I just remember just wanting to reach out and be like, thanks for what you did. And I know that's kind of weird. I don't live in New York, but we don't know what could have happened in that situation. Had he not come up to you and someone else, not even in the same car, we're talking about him going on a spree of 8 instead of 4 or 5. It changes everything. And I think what the MMA community does very well to this day is it's always our mission to take somebody who either doesn't watch it as much or has never watched it, and show them that we're not just barbarians. We're not just, it's not just human cockfighting. Like, we are literally people, and we're some of the most interesting people you'll find. And you're also some of the most generous people. And, hearing, that Frank Shamrock did that, Keith Jardine, like, that's crazy to hear about that stuff, because it's not stuff that was widely talked about. Because again, they didn't go, hey, look at what we sent this guy. Like, look at what we're doing. They just did it. And
Yeah.
that to me speaks volumes. Speaks volume.
Yeah, no,
About
and
the
it really is. Nobody, I think when I went to Albuquerque, it was in a magazine in Albuquerque, but it wasn't. None of these people did anything to promote themselves. Like, people would post about it and say, well, of course they're doing it, they're jumping on a big story. And I would say, no, where do you see anything about it? If you don't see it coming from me, or you don't see like Ariel or someone like that posting about it, the UFC is not posting about it. They're not posting about it. It's the MMA media that would post about it, and that's their job, but they're not posting about it to get the UFC any sort of, points or anything like that. So that is the best part. It was never about the individual fighter or the individual organizations doing it for notoriety, because they didn't. It was just really good people doing really nice things for someone who definitely needed it at the time.
Yeah, and I think, to anybody, hopefully somebody who was a part of that, whether it was an interview or sent you something, like whatever it was, not looking for notoriety. Just thank you to each one
Yeah.
of you that were a part of that, because like Joe said, like you said, like that is what got you through it.
Yeah.
Sitting in a hospital bed, probably thinking over and over, what could I have done differently? You're thinking going. And instead, you've got this outpouring of a community that you've only seen from afar.
Yeah. Very far.
Third
row from the top far.
So I think that's crazy. So we talked about kind of our love for hockey before that. I'll shift the gears, but my first game was in 1997. I was 3 rows from the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
So I know exactly how you feel about that, because
Yeah,
I've been there and you're like, I can't see anything.
But you know what? For hockey, it's not so bad because the ice is so big. When you're 3 rows from the top and you're trying to look at the cage, your eyes are you almost have to specifically avert your eyes from the scoreboard while you're looking down. And for an MMA card, it's almost impossible.
No, and that's the thing, is that I remember the first time I went to a fight live, like it was UFC on FX3. It was in Fort Lauderdale. It was like a Harley Davidson, they did a contest, and they're like, the most votes, that's where it's going to be. And I remember hearing the fights, and I'm like, where's all the sound? I can't hear the commentary. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it's just pitter pitter. And then, like you said, when you sit in those higher seats, you look and you're like, I can see everything way better up there than if I look down here.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So I remember my first fight. My first live event was actually the Elite XC, the one when Kimbo fought Thompson.
Oh,
at the Prudential Center, because that my friend, I work in box office. That's my job, and I started that career at Madison Square Garden, and one of my bosses went over to the Prudential Center when it opened. So when they got that card, he called me. He's like, "Would you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "All right, when we get closer, I'll be in touch." So he got me some tickets, and we went there. And I think I was the only one, I think, rooting for Joey Villasenor when he fought Phil Baroni, because we're so local to Long Island. I think everyone was rooting for Baroni except my wife and I. We were rooting for Joey, so that was it. And here's another tidbit for you. The day of the attack, we were going to go to John Vellante, Long Island guy.
Okay. Yeah,
and
Long
Sefton.
Island. Yeah,
Long Island. They were there was a card at the Meadowlands, I believe it was the Meadowlands, and we wanted to go. I was going to try to get tickets that night and go to that card, but I couldn't because I was in the hospital. I wanted to see John, and Ray Sefo was actually fighting that night too. So I wanted to. Those were the two guys I wanted to see, but I was otherwise occupied.
I still think it's crazy that Ray Sefo fought on one of his own cards.
Yeah.
Because you had to think, like, the other guy was like, I don't want to beat up the guy who signs my paycheck.
I don't want to beat up the boss. Well, and I mean, I always, talk about UFC and MMA. Like, I think for me, the most exciting discipline was always kickboxing. I always liked the kickboxing and the Muay Thai, and, just going back to the old K1 and things like that. I love that stuff. And, up through, Glory, I think they do a great job. And so I love the kickboxing aspect. So that's where I was like, I could see Ray Sefo fight in person. And, but it wasn't to be. Fortunately, I was able to see John fight in person a few times after that, though.
See, that's cool, though.
Yeah.
I know one of John's last fights, he fought Chris Barnett, who's somebody that I've known for years. He actually is a Tampa native. They don't really talk about that much. They say he fights out of Georgia. I'm like, he's from Tampa. Don't discredit us, would you?
Yeah.
But it's so funny because, like you said, you just talked about some heavy hitters, or as GSP would say, heavy hitters.
Yeah.
GSP still gave me the best line in all of MMA ever, and he just said, "Josh Koscheck is not a tomato can." And everyone was like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for somebody to call me out on that one, because it's still my favorite, because I'll say it all the time. And then when we're watching hockey, somebody will say, oh, he's a heavy hitter. And I'll go, heavy hitter. You have to get rid of those H's.
Well, I still I am not impressed with your performance.
Which is funny because his English was so bad at the time.
Yeah.
He thought that Matt was talking down to him.
Yeah.
And he literally just went in there and said that. And they've even said, like, later on, like, I didn't know what he said. I just got in there and said stuff.
Yep. Oh, yeah. But it's funny because George is like one of the most dangerous guys on the planet, but he just seems like such a salt of the earth good guy that anyone could have said something in his ear and he may have said it and not know what it was anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think in that moment, there's times where this isn't the WWE. This isn't, wrestling. But you can't tell me some of those scenes are not so scripted that you're like, oh, look, hey, the person that you want to fight that you just called out of nowhere. Hey, look, he's sitting right there.
Yeah.
Let's bring him in.
Yeah. Well, I was like going back to 128. Like what I thought was really cool was when Jones won and then they brought Rashad in the cage right away. And because, there was the whole thing with the Jackson Winklejohn, the whole John Jones, Rashad. And
Rashad was supposed to fight Shogun.
Yeah, and what people don't know, that card was after I went to Albuquerque, and I had met Rashad, and like I said, I ended up in the cage with him to kill some time. And as Rashad is going to the cage, he whispers in my ear. He goes, "Man, you're everywhere." And then he goes into the cage, and they had the thing with John, and I was like, "Oh man, I got goosebumps right now just talking about that."
That's
and
awesome.
Because I love Rashad too, so he's like, "Man, you're everywhere," and I was like, "Oh shit, that's amazing." So
and that's the feeling of, it's the feeling of metal bands and MMA fighters, and I'll say that because a metal band will see you once, and the second time you go to see them, they're like, "Hey, it's you."
Yep.
And you're like, "Me?"
Well, I will say this, who you can also throw in there? We talked about this a little bit before we started here, are the hockey fighters. They're the same way. Hockey fighters are the same way. You meet them once, they'll remember you forever because they're just like regular guys, and they're the best guys in all of sports. They are just regular blue collar guys, and you meet them once, and that's it, and they'll never forget you.
Well, and hopefully somebody gets to some fighting because Toronto did win 2-1.
All right. Well,
I heard you guys were watching the game and you didn't watch the other three, so you guys are responsible for this.
I take full responsibility, so I will not watch any of the next game.
No, and I use the S word, not the shutout, but I use the S word today. I'm going to take some responsibility too.
Well, listen, you used it before we fucked up, so it's your fault. So that's all on you.
Well, and perfect transition, because as soon as you turn on your camera, I'm like, I see hockey pads, I see jerseys. I saw one that I wanted to burn in the back because it looks like it's a Bruins jersey, but I could be wrong.
Actually, it's a Providence Bruins jersey. It's their
we're okay.
affiliate. A friend of mine, Eric Cairns, he's a former NHLer. He actually is the director of pro personnel now for the Islanders. And but when he got picked up by the Islanders, they didn't bring him up right away, and he played a few games in Providence. So that's actually his Providence Bruins jersey.
Okay, that's acceptable.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Everybody in Boston.
Yeah, he was never part of the Bruins organization. It was a loan. So yeah, it was just a loan. He played a couple of games there and then came up here.
So talk about the room that's behind you, because again, I know from the book, I won't say I've read the book because I feel terrible that I haven't read the book because I love reading. There's a whole bookshelf of stuff. But I know that I was reading through the reviews and somebody was like, "This is just a sports guy." And I was like, that makes it even cooler. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, what am I supposed to be? That's who I am. As far as the room goes, very fortunate that my wife is a hockey fan. We actually met at a hockey game. She's just a maniacal sports fan, as big as any guy that I know. And I've been a collector of memorabilia for a very long time. And basically what I would do, if for people that aren't familiar, where the Nassau Coliseum is, where the Islanders used to play, on the other side of the parking lot is a Marriott hotel. And most of the teams would stay at the Marriott. So people would be outside in between the Marriott and the Coliseum waiting for autographs. I would be there. I would get an autograph or two, but mostly I would make fight tapes of the guys that were coming in. So I would put all their fights on a tape and I would give it to the player and try to trade them for a stick or something like that. So, so at the most, when I was in, before real life took over, I had accumulated over 600 sticks. And I had a bunch of jerseys. Yeah, I had over 600 sticks just of guys who fought. Unfortunately, at a certain point, real life took over. My wife got into a car accident. She's fine, but we needed to buy a new car. So I had to liquidate a lot of the collection. But I'm rebuilding it now. I have 149. I'm next one will be 150. But on the wall here, I got a bunch of jerseys, some gloves, some helmets back there. Just I said the guys who do that job are really good. They're really gracious. They're really appreciative. And some of these guys I've been friends with for 30 years or so. Started out just meeting them as they're walking across the rink. And we still talk to this day. So they're good guys, and I'm real fortunate. And so we've been in this place now about a year and a half. I've never had I've had a room here or there in places we've lived, but never anything. I have the whole basement here. And if I could lift up my laptop, I'd take you around. It's a pretty good sized basement, and I have everything over here. So this is just a small portion of what I have, but it's cool because I get to share it with my family, because we all love sports and we come down here and watch the games and stuff like that. And it's not, people call it a man cave, but I'm cool. I'm lucky I have a wife that's cool enough to appreciate the stuff too.
So what's the official name for it then, if it's not the man cave?
I don't know. I've been messing with a few things. I was going to call it the cement factory, stuff like that, but I don't really have a name yet. I should think of something, but I'm leaning towards cement factory.
I mean, the sin bin sounds cool, but it also sounds like you're doing some really weird shit down there. So.
Well, sin bin would work because people that know hockey know what it is, but that could be it too. But I don't have an official name yet. Maybe that's something I should get on right now. Maybe I'll take the summer to think about it. So before next season starts, I'll have a name for it.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because to me, I grew up, I watched, I played baseball, I watched football, and I kind of watched hockey. I didn't really understand it growing up. And I remember going to that game and being like, I love this. Like, this is what I love. And then when I kind of fell out of football was around the same time I fell in love with MMA. And it changed everything because I'm not a violent person. I don't fight people, but I loved watching fights and listening. And like you said, learning through osmosis. And I'll never forget, I'm watching a fight and I went, just get up. Like, I don't understand why. And then I started training jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And I got stuck in that same position and I went, oh, that's why, because he can't move.
Yeah.
And there's certain things you'll see, and I think I'm never going to say to anybody, I could beat you in the cage. Like, nah, it's not going to happen. But I've seen things, and I've been watching fights, and I'll say stuff, and then the commentary team will say the exact words I just said. And I keep telling my girlfriend, I was like, you have to stop letting them bug the house. It's getting out of hand here.
Yeah, exactly. Great minds, right? They're just stealing your stuff. Hey, you said jiu-jitsu. I want to say thank you to someone else. When everything happened, I think everyone knows the name Matt Serra, and Matt, he had a few of his schools here on Long Island, and he had my sons trained at his school for a couple of years, and he didn't charge us a dime.
Wow.
I think, no, actually I shouldn't say that. We did pay. And then there was a certain point where something happened and we were having some financial problems. And I told him we were going to have to stop. And he's like, no, don't stop. Just keep them coming. So we did start out paying. And then when I told him we'd have to leave, he said, no way. He goes, you're not leaving. And they continued to train. And that was really nice of him to do that. I haven't spoken to him in a while, but he was always really great to me and loved my kids, and he's a fantastic person. So I just wanted to say that. I don't know if he watches, but he was.
We're gonna get him to watch this one because so one of the people that trains with him, Matt Fervolo, just won last weekend.
Yeah,
and he splits his time between Gracie, Tampa South, and New York.
Mm-hmm.
And so congrats to Matt. That was an amazing steamroller win. And Matt Serra, you're a kick-ass person. We'd love to have you on the show.
Yeah, and see how
little plug there.
Well, you could talk about how the sports are intertwined, because I got a friend that I met in Orlando this year, played for the Solar Bears, Long Island kid, Jimmy Mazza, who was at the fight because he's buddies with Fervola. See, it's all intertwined here.
And that's, again, I love it. And it will never change. To me, the two sports to watch, hockey and MMA. I cannot watch football anymore. I can't watch baseball.
Baseball I gave up on a few years ago. I just think it became too much of a me sport, and they're messing around with the game too much, which is unfortunate, because I think 2 seasons after I bailed, I grew up a Braves fan. That's when they won the World Series. But that's okay. I saw my World Series in '95. Football, I can only watch Buffalo. I'm a Bills fan. They're the only I can watch Buffalo Bills, and I actually really enjoy the Canadian League. Believe it or not, I find it really, really fun to watch. When I was in Orlando, the cool thing was their coach, Matt Karkner. He was a player here. He had a great career in the NHL. He was here in the islands for a little bit, and my wife and I were down in Florida visiting friends in Sarasota. And I texted Matt and I said, hey, you guys have a game. I want to come to the game. And he's like, actually, would you come in and talk to the team? Tell them your story and things like that, which is great because that's really something I want to get into. I want to get into public speaking, and I'm always hesitant to call it motivational speaking because I don't know if you really need, if a grown adult should need another grown adult to motivate them, but like inspirational, whatever it is, you know what I'm trying to say. Which I was floored by, and it was awesome. I mean, Matt's been someone that's been in my corner. He's a big, I don't want to say like he supports me. He's just he's in my corner. And the cool thing was a lot of these guys are really young. And there was a kid there named, everyone's a kid to me, named Luke Boca. And he came up to me and he's like, hey, do you watch MMA? And I said, well, I don't really watch too much anymore. I said, but I didn't grow up with it. I was in my 20s. I said, but I love it. And we started talking about guys, and he was saying guys that he likes now, which unfortunately I didn't know any of the names. And I go, let me throw a name at you. I don't know if you've ever watched this fights. And he's like, who? I'm like, Vanderlei Silva. And he goes, no, I don't know who that is. And I'm like, all right, your assignment. He's a kid. This is a kid. I go, your assignment is to go and watch Vanderlei Silva fights on YouTube. I said, that is the epitome of violence. I said, you must watch
the Pride fights.
Yeah, you must watch Vanderlei Silva. So it was cool because like a lot of these hockey guys, especially the more physical guys, they really like MMA, and a lot of them incorporate training. For my podcast, I interviewed a player named Yannick Turcotte. He was in the Islanders system for a little bit. He's playing in Adirondack now. He trains MMA. He trains MMA. Does a lot of heavy bag work. A lot of these guys do it, and they don't just train it. They enjoy watching it. So it's pretty cool when the hockey fighters and the MMA, they kind of get together. They kind of mesh. So for me, it's kind of like two worlds that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and I'll say this. It was a few years ago. I could probably look it up. Chernak did something, and he hip tossed a guy that was fighting him. And I was like, that's an MMA move. And I was like, you didn't just do that. And even Tanner Janot earlier in the season, he boxed and he literally slipped, turned the hips, and did the uppercut. He didn't just go, uppercut. Knocked the guy out cold.
Yeah.
And I went, oh. And I'd love to get more hockey guys to talk about the MMA factor, because there is a huge factor. You watch some of these fights and you see two people who look like they've never thrown a punch.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just kind of hitting. And I'm like, why are you hitting them in the pads? Why are you hitting?
Yeah.
And then you see those guys, like you said, the enforcers, the fighters who are really like ready to go.
Yeah. And the differences nowadays, back in the day, like in the 80s when there wasn't MMA or it wasn't mainstream, whatever, you'd always get, the whole thing with Bob Probert in Detroit training at Kronk's gym, and him and Joe Koser going to Kronk's gym, where now, in the last, 30 years, 30, 35 years, MMA is huge. So now these guys aren't just going to boxing gyms. They're training in all the disciplines, because something like jiu-jitsu, they're not going to fight on the ground, but there's the grappling aspect to it, where you're grabbing a guy's jersey and you're trying to hold a guy out, and you want to do the grip. So that's where the jiu-jitsu would come in. And of course, teaching them how to throw a punch the right way, like with your whole body. So it's not like it used to be. It used to be, hey, I went to a boxing gym, where now these guys aren't going to boxing gyms. They're going to MMA gyms in the off season to train, and it's all part of the routine. It's not even a question. It's just a question of which one are we going to.
Yeah. And I love that, because even you just see fighters cross train. You're seeing a lot more fighters go to different gyms to get those different aspects. They're always going to have a one-stop shop. And I love that NHL players are kind of branching out, because like you said, the grips are so important.
Yeah.
Judo, jiu-jitsu, whatever you're looking at there, grips are number one. And in that moment, you're sitting there, it's a grip battle. And sometimes you just see a guy throw another guy down and you go, that wasn't just on, an accident. Like, he knew
Right.
exactly what he was doing in that moment.
Yeah, we used to have more access to the hockey players here with the Islanders than we do now. But I would always tell the guys who would fight, if I knew him or just met him, I would say, listen, if you're thinking about training, I would always, Keith Trimble here, he runs Belmore Kickboxing MMA, and I know Keith really well, and I train there, and I would always say you should go see Keith over there because he's unbelievable. Like, to me, he's the master, and I would always say, go to Belmore, tell them that you know me, and they'll work with you and everything. I said, because you're not going to find any better training. And I don't know if they ever took me up on it, but I would always get in their ear, go to Belmore, go to Belmore. And, because I would do personal lessons with Keith maybe twice a month, just hitting the mitts and everything. Well, I mean, what a workout. I mean, it's an unbelievable workout. And, I would be there when some of the pro guys would be there. And just watching them, I'd be standing there just like this, like wow, like I remember one day I was walking into the gym, and it sounded like there was a machine gun going off, and it was Keith holding mitts for Costa Philippou, and it just sounded like it was just his hand speed. It was like I'd never heard anything like that before. And I was probably 20 feet outside the gym, and the door was open, and it's just like pop, 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 pop. And I'm in there, and I don't even think I made it. I think I just was like, holy shit, like that, a human being can do that. And it was like, wow, just to see it up close,
And that's amazing because, again, the MMA community garnered something for you, opened a door that you were staring at and looking at and going, I like watching it, and that's the thing. You like watching it, but to do it in any form changes your life.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And just like the friends that you make in it, like I said, Keith Jardine and I, we speak and text or direct messages every now and then, and like I just mentioned, Keith Trimble, him and I haven't spoken in a bit, but I think we're the kind of friends where we could not speak for 6 months, and within 4 texts, we're done, we're back. It's just like the kind of like the guy friendship, and I consider Keith a really good friend, and someone I used to talk to Pat Miletich all the time, but I think he's off of Twitter now. But it's just cool. And, one guy who I haven't met yet in person that I hope some point gets to New York, I know he's big into gaming, is Jens Pulver. That's on my bucket list to meet Jens Pulver. So he's one of my all-timers.
And Jens getting the way they inducted him into the UFC Hall of Fame recently and didn't tell him that's what it was for.
Yeah.
And just watching Jens weep.
Yeah.
It just hits right here because that was long overdue.
Oh God. Yeah.
We talk about the people who are probably, who are either never going to get into the UFC Hall of Fame or it's been too long. And Jens was on that list. Frank Shamrock's on that list.
Yeah.
And I feel like, put the personal things aside, what those people did for the organization, and Frank wasn't there that long.
Right.
But he made enough of an impact. And, so did Ken Shamrock. There's so many people, and reading the Shamrock book, if you haven't.
Yes. Oh yeah.
It is so intense.
Yes.
Because you're like, wow, they should be dead.
Yeah.
Like,
but you know dead. What? A lot of these, if you read Jen's book, that is, he has a book out. I don't know if you ever saw that one. It's not a very thick book. I think it's an old book, but it talks about his upbringing. And it's like I always say, I live, we're middle class and everything. I work, I've worked 2 jobs and things like that. I do what I have to do. And there are people that have more money than they could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. And then there are people that are wondering where their next meal is going to come from. And we're all on the same planet. You know what I'm saying? So like, I'm reading Jen's book about his upbringing, and I'm just like, holy shit, I can't believe this is real life. And then you talk about, with the Shamrocks and the stuff that how they were raised and all this other stuff. It's like, it blows your mind. And you think about where they could have ended up.
Yeah.
And instead they ended up, they found sports, they found martial arts, and they ended up, being really inspirations to a lot of people. And, like when I read, I say it again, when I read Jen's book, I was just floored, and I'm just like, man, I just said, I know a couple of times we talked, and I'm like, if I ever meet you, I'm giving you the biggest hug I can, like it was unbelievable, and I know there were a few times he was saying he might get to New York for some, I know he's a gamer, some gaming thing, but it never panned out. But he's definitely someone I listen, I've been real lucky to meet so many of the fighters that I am big fans of. Jens is one I have not met yet. So he's definitely up there on the bucket list to meet him.
Oh, absolutely. And I understand why.
Yeah.
The WEC days are the reason I watch MMA. I caught a WEC wreckage, and it was Uriah Faber, Mike Brown to Jose Aldo, Cub Swanson when he did the double flying knee.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough when ATT did their grand opening, I got a call from Master Ricardo Laborio, one of the co-owners at the time, and he said, Matt, will you come down and take pictures? I was like, that's 4.5 hours away from me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I drove down there, and Mike Brown was there, and he was signing autographs, and I was like, I know I'm here to take pictures. I was like, but I can't pass up this moment.
Right.
Yeah. And I walked over, and I just said, hey, man, I was like, I just need you to know that, like, the first fight I ever watched was yours.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, so what you think? And I was like, I'm still a fan 15 years later.
Yeah.
Or, 10 years later at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm going to double check this before I say it, but this always gets me. If you go to Mike Brown's Instagram right now.
I'm not going to do it now. But...
No. I'm just saying. If you went right now, I'm like, yeah, stop what you're doing.
Yeah, I was going to say we're doing something now.
The picture that he has for his profile picture, I took.
Oh, that's awesome.
7 years ago, and he still has it. And it blows my mind because I was like, I got to meet him. I got to handshake. And that day I met, Robbie Lawler. He almost kicked my ass. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. It was a scary day.
I'm sure you had it coming.
Damn, dude. Already throwing like, geez. All right, we're throwing the gloves down. Let's go. It's funny because just thinking of that, there was a video of Marc-Andre Fleury trying to fight Biddington from St. Louis.
Yeah.
And he's like, come on, let me go. And the ref's like, no. And he goes, come on. He goes, it'll be good for the fans. Yeah. He goes, I'm ready to go. He's like, I'm not done with him yet.
Yeah.
And I think that was the game that Biddington had like slashed a couple of his guys pretty rough. And I went,
Biddington needs to be slapped around by someone tougher than Fleury, I think.
I agree.
Yeah.
Now I'm just thinking like, go ahead, Bobrovsky. Like, go for it. I don't know who is a tough goalie. Like, who do you think is like a tough goalie that'd be like, you know what? Let's go.
I don't know if there are any more tough goalies. There used to be some really, really tough. There was a guy named Ray Emery. Unfortunately, he's passed away. That guy, he loved fighting. I mean, he really, really loved fighting. He was really tough. Going back a ways for myself, the Islanders here, Billy Smith, he was a bit of a psycho. There were some pretty tough goalies. Ron Hextall, people may know that name, but Felix Potvin did pretty well against him. So there was a minor league goalie that always found himself in the middle of stuff named Neil Little. He was in the Flyers system. He didn't mind duking it out either. So, but yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing someone smack around Binnington. I don't know what that guy's story is. Like, I love his spirit. I love his fire, but sometimes I think people need to be brought down a peg. And but you know what? It's the way hockey is now. It's not as tough as it used to be. So people that ordinarily don't look to start stuff, they may now. So but I don't think Binnington's pulling that shit 20 years ago. That's for sure.
No.
He would have got one through the net.
The game I went to, I believe it was Darren Pupo was the goalie for the Lightning.
Oh yeah, that's going back a ways. That's the good old days. Yep.
Somebody crashed into him, and he literally put his stick down, took his blocker off, like took everything off, skated up to him, tapped him on the shoulder. They turned around and he just decked him right in the face.
Yeah,
I just remember being like, well, like you said, that's hockey 20 years ago.
Yeah, if anyone did that now, the people on Twitter would be calling the police, and they'd want them arrested and fined. It's unfortunate. It seems to be the way a lot of sports are going, and And unfortunately, hockey's not immune to that. It just the kinder, gentler world that we live in. It's hockey sports are a microcosm of society. So I guess it's a kinder, gentler game, but to me, it's not better at all. It was one of the beautiful things about the sport, accountability, and there just doesn't seem to be any of that anymore. But that is another show.
No, and I'll tell you this. Number one thing the NHL needs to do, look at me, NHL, look at me. Move headquarters from Toronto, because it really looks bad when a team is playing Toronto and things aren't getting called. Just saying.
I think the worst part about it is I was hoping it really has nothing to do with NHL headquarters. It has more to do with Toronto. I was kind of hoping that if they lost tonight, I was going to stay up as late as possible and listen to Toronto sports radio, because there's nothing like listening to Toronto sports radio after a loss, and especially after a series loss. It's pretty funny.
Oh gosh, yeah. I'm going to have to go back in the archives for that from last year.
Yeah,
or any other year going back to,
Listen, I'm not I think it'd be a miracle if they pulled off 3 more wins in a row. So you could also just be patient, maybe wait a day or two, and you could just listen to it live as it happens.
Oh, yeah, I think that'll be good. And on that note, Joe, thank you so much, man. This was I wasn't sure if we were going to talk mostly about what happened, because obviously that is, I'm going to say obviously 100 times. People are going to do shots on that. It's a huge part of your life, but it didn't define who you are forever. Yep. It is a part of you, and it's not anything that's ever going to change. But like you said, you're taking the subway every single day, twice a day. You're still living your life. And, I know when I was 18 and I got my first car accident, it was because of a left turn, and it wasn't my fault. Somebody literally cut across from another parking lot. I didn't make left turns without a traffic light for a year.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
And it's just that panic, and I don't want to go to the level of PTSD, but if anybody could have got it from an event, it would have been you in that situation. Let's be honest here.
Sure.
And we go back to the MMA community. They really uplifted you and showed you what you did was great. Here's what you didn't miss because of what happened. And you said your wife and your kids, those really drove you. And in that moment, and you got to thank them every day too. I'm sure, and I'm sure they're thankful for what happened, because again, different background, and not watching UFC 1, November of 1993. We're not having this conversation. We're not.
I am. Thank you for having me on here. Yeah, even before that, my family's been everything to me. And I've never been one to be like the party guy, even as a teenager, or go out and look to sow my oats or anything. I've been pretty fortunate. I met a terrific lady, and then we got married, and we have 2 wonderful sons. Got a big event coming up here in a couple of weeks. My oldest is graduating university with a master's in aerospace engineering. So I got that big moment here. We're real fortunate. I got my other son. He's halfway through college. He's going for social work. So I am very blessed all around, and I wake up every day, and I am very grateful for what I have. I mean, we could always have more in terms of finances or material things, but it's not the stuff that matters is what we have in abundance, and that's love, and we love each other, and we're real lucky. And I'm very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful that there were people looking out for me that day that allowed me to continue to live my life and experience all this wonderful stuff. So anybody that's ever reached out to me and sent me a message, or like we talked about the MMA community and things like that, I know I mentioned a few people here tonight, and it really only scratches the surface. There were so many people that reached out to me at the time, and I just want to thank everybody for that. Each and every one of you that ever sent me a message or sent me a text or whatever, it definitely helped in my healing process, and I think it's important that everybody knows that.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell your son going for social work, if he has any questions, 2 years of social work under the belt.
Right. Absolutely. Again.
Tell him to run. Tell him to run.
Well, he loves it. He loves it. And his girlfriend right now, she's going for the same thing. So maybe one day they'll open up their own practice or something. But man, I just couldn't be prouder.
Absolutely.
It's just incredible. Like I always wanted, I think it's a cliche when you say you want your kids to have it better than you. And, I started college and I never finished. And now I got another week or so, and my one son will be graduating with a master's. And then another couple of years, I got another son graduating. And man, I hope they dwarf me in everything. I hope so. And I'm just so happy. I'm just so proud. So I'm just very lucky.
No, absolutely. And I know, I don't have that feeling, but I know my dad has that feeling, and he always wanted the best for me. And, it was really funny when I first started the show, like I came out with merch and he's like, how do I get a shirt?
Yeah.
And like 2 weeks later, he's sending me pictures of him in his shirt. And he was so happy about it because obviously it's called Quiggin Out, my last name, Quiggin.
Yeah.
So, and, but yeah, I think that's every parent what they want. They want it better for their kids. And it's not to say that you had a bad upbringing or,
No.
Sometimes it might not have been the best.
Yeah.
But you do everything you can to carve the way basically for them to make their own choices, their own life decisions. And it sounds like you got two good ones there. So it's super proud and happy for you to have that. And, congrats to both of them just for everything they've done, especially getting a master's in aerospace is not an easy task by any means. So
that's Greek to me, man. I don't know any of that stuff. I look at his computer screen sometimes and I don't know what the hell it is. So I say, you know what that is? And he goes, yeah. I'm like, all right, well, that makes one of us. So
well, that's perfect. And like I said, we'll wrap it up here, and I'm just gonna take a moment here. Talk about the sponsors of the show. So we've got La Barba Cubana, amazing beard care, Fat Boy Jiu-Jitsu, amazing BJJ gear for bigger guys, not the small guys. At Tim_makes knives on Instagram. He makes custom knives. So if anybody out there's got anything, go ahead and message him and see if you can't get that. Also, Bertzos baked goods. Now I can't even say it tonight. That's how excited I am. I'm still talking. Amazing bakery out of Orlando. So the next time you're in Orlando, look them up because you will not be disappointed. So most of you notice I wore this shirt for two reasons. Saying life is short, when I picked it up and I looked at it, I said, this is the perfect shirt for the show, but it's also one of the sponsors. So Tales of a Concert Junkie, it says life is short, buy the tickets. That goes for concerts, that goes for hockey, that goes for MMA. Like, just do it. Use the promo code Quiggin Out, get 15% off your order. And if you're looking for some training gear, we've got Rev Gear, and use that promo code Quiggin Out as well. It's one word. I know that was a lot to say, but Joe, more than anything, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on the show. I know, like I said, we've been talking for a while, and I'm trying to figure out, like you said, this wasn't to get clicks. This wasn't to...
I hope not. I hope not. I certainly hope it wasn't to get clicks.
This wasn't to jump on a story, but this was more about two people who love the MMA community and found it in very different ways. And I think, how it kept us together, keeps us involved and keeps us intact. Anytime anybody's wavering about what's going on in life, like, find MMA. I'm telling you now, you're going to find a community full of people. And I'm going to bring up one in particular before I go. Jillian DeCourcy, is literally like in the medical field as far as like psychology goes. And this is a woman who fought last weekend. Unfortunately, she didn't win defending her title, but this is somebody who then goes to work on Monday with a black eye and helps people work through their problems. Like, that person you see fighting in the cage more than likely has a day job. They have something that they do or that they're passionate about, and you can never judge a book by its cover. And I hate that I just used that, but it's the absolute truth. So, with that being said, Joe, on behalf of myself, Combat Press, the Quiggin Out MMA podcast, it's just a privilege to have you on, and thank you so much. Stick around, and we've got a few more things to talk about after the show.
Hey, thanks for having me anytime. And can I just promote my podcast? Is that
please,
okay?
Please.
So if anyone is interested in hockey or hockey fighting, I do have my own podcast. It's called Coliseum Chronicles, The Penalty Box. It's an interview-based show, and I have on guys who've done the job of the hockey enforcer. I think I just released my 113th episode.
Wow.
So it's pretty good. And the good news is it really doesn't have much to do with me. I just ask the questions and let the real stars of the show answer them and tell you their stories, their hockey journey. And we talk about a lot of scraps. So you don't need to be an Islanders fan to enjoy it. But if you like the physical side, you may want to give it a try. And it's available on all platforms. And hey, Matt, why don't you have your sponsor there, the beard people, send me some beard oil for this thing? What do you think?
Oh yeah, no, I'll talk to him. So Aaron is, yeah, we'll talk about that after.
Yeah.
We'll get on that. So everybody watching, like, wait. But
Matt, thank you very much for allowing me to tell my story. It really means a lot to me and my family. So they wanted to say thank you as well.
Absolutely, man. So thank you so much. And like I said, stick around, and we've got a few more things to talk about.
Right on.
Hey guys, don't forget to hit the subscribe, little bell, keep you up to date on all things Quiggin Out. Thanks again.